I have a question for writers in Hollywood. Can we stop R-wording women to aid male character development? I love storytelling. If you're familiar with pretty much any of my work, I think that's easy to see. But I've seen a worrying trend concentrated in the last 5 years or so that has really turned me off from popular news shows. The vast majority of adult programs coming out at some point have a character that is sexually assaulted. And to boil this entire video down to one statement, I'm sick of seeing it, but specifically, I'm sick of seeing it done so badly. Hello, ladies, men, and non-binary friends. Welcome back. Whenever I talk about the troubling rise of sexual assault depictions in media, I am most often assured by other women who agree. There is an unsettling amount of sexual assault in adult media. But with critics of my point of view, the defense is always the same. Well, the show is dark and gritty. It's supposed to be realistic. But the cold, hard truth, most of the time, is that it's actually not. Speaking as an SA survivor, I can tell you most depictions of SA, at least from the point of view of the survivor's experience, are not actually realistic or accurate portrayals in today's media. In addition, these R-words and SAs are hardly, if ever, actually integral to the plot or the victim's character development. I actually talked about this exact phenomenon on my TikTok months ago and received an overwhelming response. Gritty, dark, realistic to male directors means 1, war, 2, grape, 3, hero complex protagonist. It's realistic. There are literal dragons. Dude, what? It's realistic. There are dragons and zombies. Especially in fantasy and sci-fi. Like, if you have magic and dragons, why can't you create a world where that kind of thing just doesn't happen? Lord of the Rings managed to do it. They say it's realistic, but make it pornographic. Realistic, but they have women look contemporary in a world set in the past. Realistic, but they have one guy that fights off 10 guys successfully. The only unforgivable historical inaccuracy is giving women agency. Shows and books where women have agency are always treated with less seriousness by male creators and audiences, and I'm sick of it. So if these inclusions of sexual assault fail to ground the narrative in realism, what are they there for? And why are they included so often? Well, there are 3 reasons that I see the most. 1, it is a lazy way to elicit an emotional reaction from your audience. 2, it is done to develop another character besides the victim. 3, fetish content or some sort of weird perversion from the writers. We're going to get into each one of these. Number 1, it is used as a lazy way to elicit a strong emotional reaction from an audience, and it's most often done at the expense of female characters, which, historically, Hollywood just cares less about. If you're someone who really pays attention to storytelling, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who disagrees with that statement. Instead of including a meaningful arc for these survivor characters about what it means to live and love after enduring something so traumatic, it's usually rarely ever talked about. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger because I can't see. The inclusion of an SA scene is just added to the checklist of writers who want to be edgy and added an element of darkness to their work. Something that is so horrible that it weeds out an audience that is only entertained by more palatable content, leaving behind a viewership exclusively filled with intellectuals or something like that. And the victim characters are hardly ever changed by this very traumatic experience. Sometimes they may have a male character fix them without ever going into the emotional depth that is necessary for that kind of healing. But in my opinion, using one of the worst things that can happen to a woman as a plot tool is just fucking gross. Number 2, the most common and most egregious example of terrible writing when writing SA into a story is doing it to a female character to aid a male character's development. Sansa Stark is an excellent example of this. There's actually an article that goes really in depth as to why this scene's writing is so bad, and it takes into account a lot of the criticism that that scene received from its audience at the time it was shown on air. Joanna Robinson from Vanity Fair described all of my issues with this scene perfectly. Excellent point number 1. But as little as any of us wanted to see Sansa physically punished and exploited, was it really important to make that scene about Theon's pain? If Game of Thrones was going to go there, shouldn't they have at least had the courage to keep the camera on Turner's face? Excellent point number 2. Because this rape scene undercuts all the agency that's been growing in Sansa since the end of last season. She was at the height of her power earlier in the episode when, stripped back down to her red-headed Tully roots, she told Miranda, in no uncertain terms, that Winterfell was her home and she would not be intimidated. It's right in line with the Game of Thrones approach to storytelling that Sansa would have the rug pulled out from under her. Have we forgotten Oberyn so soon? But did it really have to be a rape that brought her so low? Is that really the only horror Game of Thrones can imagine visiting on its female characters? Excellent point number 3. I'd never advocate that Game of Thrones or any work of fiction shy away from edgy plots out of fear of backlash or controversy, but edgy plots should always accomplish something above pure titillation or shock value, and what exactly was accomplished here? Alan said in an interview that this story would position Ramsay as the new, quote, Joffrey in town, and then probably me followed closely after that, but haven't we had ample time to understand the depths of Ramsay's depravity? I think most audiences would have been happy with Sansa as avenging angel without subjecting her to rape. After all, these are the people who killed her family. Excellent point number 4. Even worse than the idea of Sansa needing this to motivate her into vengeance is the notion that the Theon character needed to watch her rape in order to snap out of whatever zombie reek fugue state he's been walking around in. I'm afraid that is the show's interpretation, based on where the camera lingered. But the last thing we needed was to have a powerful young woman brought low in order for a male character to find redemption. No thank you. Excellent point number 5. The biggest offense of HBO's Game of Thrones might muster for showing the sexual assault of yet another female protagonist is that it, quote, happened in the books. And yes, as I said up top, Ramsay's bride does get assaulted in the books. She has it much worse than Sansa, but given that the showrunners have seen fit to change so much of the book plot this season, quote, it happens in the books really isn't any kind of defense. Also, in a post-Game of Thrones Season 8 world, the quote, it made me stronger line was frankly unfucking forgivable on top of all of this. This is a perfect example of how writers use essay as a lazy tactic to elicit a strong emotional reaction from their audience, as opposed to writing it with the sensitivity and tact that it deserves and that so many essay writers are asking from their writers. I've said this in a lot of my videos that have talked about essay in the past. Trauma typically does not make you stronger, and we need to completely abandon this idea in society. For some people, yes, maybe it does, but for the vast majority of us, it changes us forever, and it does not make us stronger. It makes us harder to deal with. And this idea that people get stronger because of the horrible, horrible, traumatic things that they've been through is a really outdated idea that is actually very harmful to survivors. When most of us don't feel stronger, we just feel, again, like there's something wrong with us. Like we're surviving wrong, like we're healing wrong. And it feeds into this idea of the perfect victim that just needs to be done with. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Fine, great Kelly Clarkson song. Not an apt way to actually showcase characters that have gone through significant traumatic experiences. Just pointing that out there. But it's always someone's brother, someone's father, someone's mentor, someone's husband that is able to grow or develop or gain further insight from the audience after someone else experienced something super traumatic. It makes no sense to me. And yet I see it all the time. But when it comes to the actual victim, the event is usually brought up once, if we're lucky, and never discussed again, even though SA commonly leads to PTSD, which can affect people literally for the rest of their fucking lives, and can change them fundamentally as a person. Raping a female character to show how evil someone is at the expense of that character's autonomy is an objectively gross thing to do, and again, I think is just lazy writing. There are so many other better ways to show that someone is evil. And again, if you're going to put a character through something that traumatic, the least you can do is show the everlasting effects of that trauma and how they are affected by it throughout the rest of their story. Number 3, the fetish one. Now, this is going to be the most difficult one to prove, and I understand that. I doubt any writers would publicly admit that they have a schmetish for SA. But I've seen franchises that consistently include violent and graphic SA scenes that do not aid the development of the characters and do not aid the plot at all. So why the fuck are they there? And even though no one will ever publicly admit it, probably, there are many men that do enjoy seeing female characters, particularly characters played by beautiful actresses, shown in these violating positions, seen as helpless and abused. In addition, these scenes depicting SA are often so visceral and graphic, gratuitous even. This is another common critique that I've seen among survivors. There are so many ways to imply SA and include it in your story without explicitly showing it. And again, in my opinion, there's no reason other than some weird fetishization to show such prolonged SA scenes for camera. And I also feel like it's desensitizing us to this a little bit. Like, we've seen it in so many shows, it doesn't even hold that same gravity anymore. Just because it happens to the majority of women and is unfortunately common in our society doesn't mean we should be desensitized to it. The other common critique, realism. And to this I say, okay, here's all the reasons above, but also, where's the realism in other aspects of life? Where's the people with average bodies, average faces, plus-sized individuals, people with bad teeth? Judging by this statistic, nearly half of all characters in realistic media should be obese, 41.9%. But we don't see that. 13% of characters should be disabled. 13%. Where's the disability representation? If realism is so important to you, I can name maybe 3 characters from popular media that are disabled. That's it. Not to mention, if we're talking about fictional worlds like Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, you're talking about realism in a world with dragons and zombies. And you're talking about realism in a world with fucking magic. It's a fake world, my guy. I understand needing your fictional works to be rooted in some kind of reality. But why is it always SA that you need to ground your reality? And most often, SA against women. Believe it or not, it's bad from the industry side too. It's not just viewers that are fed up. Actors are getting sick of it too. Keira Knightley has spoken openly about how she won't take parts in modern settings because so often women are raped. And she doesn't want to be a part of a project that includes that. I have a lot of respect for her for this. Acting is a tough gig, and for many actresses looking for their first job, they may feel like they have to do things on camera that they don't want to. Push their boundaries for the sake of appearing professional, either because they don't want to seem difficult or lose out on a career-making opportunity. Plenty of actresses have come out and talked about this, sharing horrible experiences on set. Emilia Clarke, in particular, has talked at length about this. Daenerys Targaryen was her very first, real role out of drama school. And she's talked at length about especially how those first few seasons of Game of Thrones kind of traumatized her. Emilia Clarke, star of HBO's Game of Thrones, has spoken out on the issue of exploitation within the industry in a recent interview with actor Dax Shepard on his Armchair Expert podcast. Clarke, who often had to be completely naked for many scenes throughout the show's 8-season run, said she was often pressured to do so, despite feeling uncomfortable, even to the point where both she and co-star Jason Momoa were crying. Clarke was just 23 years old when she was first cast as Daenerys Targaryen. She didn't have much experience on professional sets before, and she wasn't sure what she could or could not ask for. She remembers thinking, regardless of there being nudity or not, I would have spent that first season thinking, I'm not worthy of requiring anything. I'm not worthy of needing anything at all. Whatever I'm feeling is wrong. I'm going to cry in the bathroom, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to do the scene, and it's going to be completely fine. As Clarke's fame rose with the popularity of the show, so did her ability to negotiate with producers over how much of her body would be on display. In later seasons, Clarke's character had less nude scenes, despite Game of Thrones continuing to include graphic depictions of rape, incest, and sexual violence on the show. Now, with Game of Thrones behind her, Emilia Clarke still can't seem to shake Hollywood's desire to control and display her body. She describes having fights on sets where the producers would try to convince her to go nude, saying, "You don't want to disappoint your Game of Thrones fans." And while not every set that has written in SA has these terrible conditions, there are enough that it understandably discourages professional actresses from taking on these kinds of projects. And it really does seem to be everywhere. Joe Keery has talked about how Steve Harrington was originally written as R-wording Nancy, but Keery stated that he had a different idea for the character, and thankfully, the Duffer Brothers let him. But taking out that aspect of Steve and Nancy's storyline did not change Nancy as a character. It's possible that rewrites took place to adjust for this change, but the original inclusion of SA clearly didn't make enough of an impact on Nancy's character for it to constitute a major overhaul of the show's writing. And it can be assumed that the Duffer Brothers were another writing team that did not take into account the psychological and behavioral impact of SA and the long-term effects that it can have on survivors. And now, Steve Harrington is one of the most beloved characters in the Stranger Things franchise, which would not be the case had he SA'd Nancy in the show. And he remains as probably the most powerful example of how ditching an SA storyline can positively impact your show. Think for a second how you'd feel about the development of this young love storyline if Steve had R-worded Nancy. I told my partner, and he was shocked about this revelation. He told me that if they went through with that storyline, he may not have actually watched the show. And at the very least, he would have hated Steve Harrington as a character. And unfortunately, it's not just the actresses who are having to act out that they are getting SA'd. It's also the actors that are having to R-word their co-stars that are done with this as well. The actor that plays Ramsay Bolton talked about the Sansa Stark rape scene as being the worst day of his career.
Buffy sent me into therapy, actually. Buffy crushed me. And so...
Why?
Well, there was this scene where I was paired with Buffy, and she breaks up with me, and then I go and I kind of force myself on her, and then she kicks me through a wall. It's a problematic scene for a lot of people who like the show. And it's the darkest professional day of my life. And I went to them and I said, guys, we're providing a vicarious experience for the audience. That's storytelling in general. We tempt the audience behind the eyes of the lead so that the audience can have that journey. So I was saying, everyone who's watching Buffy is Buffy, and they're not superheroes. So I'm doing this to every member of the audience, and they're going to have a very different reaction.
And this is Spike?
Buffy. Yeah.
You don't want to do it.
I don't like sexual predation scenes, anything that has that to do with it. I don't audition for those things. If there's a movie with that kind of material, I don't go to see the movie. If it pops up on television, I've got to turn the television off before I break it. I have a very visceral reaction to that stuff. And I was contracted to do this. I couldn't say no. We got the scene in the can, and it was hell. I was in the personal hell.
Were you also in personal hell, not only because you had to do it, but because the repercussions of doing that would sort of make people dislike your character?
I wasn't thinking of that. I was just having to do that to Sarah. I was just having to live through that reality. Like,
it's just
that's
something
the
that
film acting is that you make it real for yourself. Like that's the whole point if it's going to work. Because you don't want to film a scene like that and then have it suck on top of having to do it. So you want it to actually be good. So I was really releasing into the oh God,
like it's still I feel I was like pain.
Yeah,
and you went to therapy because of that.
Yeah, like I was like doing a take and then going in the corner of the set and going into the fetal position on the cement.
Oh my God! Did Sarah come up to you and say, "Are you okay?"
Yeah, they were all worried. They're like, "Be worried. I'm not okay."
You're like, "I don't like doing this."
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're doing something against your will.
Yeah, very much.
And it's actually not just actors. Writers are starting to push back against this standard as well. On the show about cops and the mentally ill, my loss of innocence began when I pitched an episode about an old lady who dies alone in a rundown mansion. In the opening scene, or teaser, her corpse is carted off in an ambulance while neighborhood kids dare each other to go into the haunted house. 2 of them sneak in. Suddenly, the ghost of the old lady appears at the top of the stairs. She descends toward them, uttering gibberish. The children scream and run. One falls. She's still coming. Cut to the title card and theme song. At the top of Act 1, our cops reveal it's not a ghost. It's another old lady who's insane and secretly living in the attic. Like Rochester's mad wife in Jane Eyre, the second old lady was stuffed up there years earlier, owing to the stigma of mental illness. Our hero cops and mental health workers must now solve the mystery of who she is and how she ended up there. The room liked the premise, and I, with a co-writer, wrote up the pitch page. Except then the notes started. Do there have to be 2 old ladies? Do they have to be so old? Are the stakes high enough? Can we create an interesting bad guy to attract a big-name guest star, etc.? By the time we went to camera, my dead old lady had turned into a 30-something adulteress who gets her head bashed in. And my old lady in the attic had turned into a beautiful blonde teenager in a basement being held captive by the world's most adorable predator, Rossif Sutherland. And I had just co-written a rape episode. Over the next year, I went from feeling indefinably icky about that episode to rage over how much female rape there is on television in general. The most notorious example is Game of Thrones, winner of 9 Creative Arts Emmys last weekend and the most nominated show going into the Primetime Emmy Awards tomorrow. After the violent rape of Sansa Stark in Season 5, Geek Girl blogger Tafkar produced a, quote, statistical analysis of rape in Game of Thrones. Rape acts in Game of Thrones, the TV series, 50. Rape victims in Game of Thrones, 29. Rape acts in A Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin, 214. Rape victims in A Song of Ice and Fire, 117. Game of Thrones toned things down in Season 6, but there's always a new show to pick up the slack, and this season, it looks as if it might be the new HBO series Westworld. In the first episode, set at a resort where humans can interact with lifelike robots, an android played by Evan Rachel Wood is dragged off by her hair to fulfill an older man's rape fantasy. It's used as a backstory, usually with graphic flashbacks for characters such as Elizabeth Jennings in The Americans, raped by her Soviet trainer. Norma Bates in Bates Motel, raped in the pilot by a previous owner of the motel, after, we later learn, being raped by her brother as a teen. The gang-raped girlfriend Lumen on Season 5 of Dexter. Claire Underwood in House of Cards, still traumatized by a college rape. Jessica Jones's lead, raped by her abductor, Keeper, Melly Grant on Scandal, raped by her father-in-law. Rape is also used as a device to motivate male heroes, from Tony's anguish and need for revenge after the rape of his psychiatrist in The Sopranos, to Ray Velcoro's anguish and need for revenge, and also a paternity test for his son, after the rape of his wife in Season 2 of True Detective. Even, quote, quality shows have rape aplenty. Anna Bates raped in Downton Abbey, Police Sergeant Catherine Callwood driven by the rape of her daughter who died by suicide in Happy Valley, Gillian recovering from years of marital rape on Last Tango in Halifax, Joan Holloway raped by her fiancé in Mad Men, Queen Mary raped by Protestant soldiers in Rain, Detective Robin Griffin dealing with the fallout from her own prom night gang rape while solving a child rape case in Top of the Lake. The current avalanche of female rape on TV has even become something of a joke, as in, I joke, morbidly, Sonia Serenia wrote in Salon that my job title has changed from television critic to, quote, senior rape correspondent. Meanwhile, Hannibal showrunner Brian Fuller made headlines last season for not using rape, telling Entertainment Weekly, it's so overexploited, it becomes callous. You're reduced to using shorthand, and I don't think there can be a shorthand for that violation. Yet another fucking reason why I love Brian Fuller. If you ever want to watch another Brian Fuller property, if you're into like creepy, kooky, quirky stuff, watch Pushing Daisies. It's an excellent fucking show. I think it's on HBO. It's written by Brian Fuller. It's fucking amazing, and you don't have to worry about anyone getting raped in that show. Note how my repetition of the word rape becomes numbing after a while. It's because seeing something over and over again tends to normalize it and eventually make it meaningless. During my year of ranting about all this TV rape to anyone who'd listen, I was forced to think about what exactly I was mad about. Did I want the female rape trope banned? No. Some shows used it in a way that was respectful to the victim and essential to the story. Even the rape factory over at Law & Order SVU might be defensible. According to a 2015 study from Washington State University, SVU's regular viewers demonstrated decreased rape myth acceptance and increased intentions to adhere to expressions of sexual consent. Viewers of the more popular CSI, on the other hand, indicated decreased intentions of seeking consent. In any case, as a writer, I don't believe in censorship. I'd never ban anyone from writing or directing rape scenes. What I object is twofold. First, how the trope is overused as a plot device. The sin of bad taste and its potential contribution to moral degradation aside, let's just say here that the young, beautiful, battered, dead female is exhaustingly trite. The second, bigger problem is with how the crime is aestheticized for the camera. Massive amounts of time and money are spent on hair, makeup, and lighting to sexualize rape victims. Look at the first scene in the first episode of the lauded French series Spiral, which shows a dead, naked girl covered in blood on a garbage heap. I'm willing to bet many minutes, if not hours, were spent lighting her and positioning the camera in order to capture the silhouette of the erect nipple on her right breast against the background of black tires. The only on-screen rape I've seen that was presented in a believable, unsexy manner was in the movie Deliverance. I'm not saying we need more scenes, such as Ned Beatty in his underwear, scrabbling in the mud while being treated like a pig, but at least it didn't prettify a crime. In this video and on other videos on my other various platforms, I've gone into things that writers commonly get wrong and how I personally have only seen 2 depictions of SA that are written realistically in regards to the survivor's experience. And both of these depictions are male characters. Oh gosh, I'm shocked. There is no single story that could ever encompass the experience of all SA survivors, but the vast majority of depictions, even though they are dark and disturbing, are not actually realistic. They do not represent accurate portrayals of what it actually means to be an SA survivor. They're lazy, they're not well researched, and they are most often written by men who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And for any writers watching this, first of all, hi, hire me. Second, if you're writing about anything that you personally haven't experienced, just do your fucking research. Talk to someone who has actually gone through what you're trying to portray. Do it honestly, do it respectfully, or just stop doing it. Stop doing these storylines. If you're not going to do your fucking research, just stop. One way that you can write essay respectfully and more accurately, easy thing, just look up common behaviors of SA victims. Read stories about victims and what it's like to have a relationship after going through something so traumatic sexually. How does that event affect the way that they interact with strangers, with other men, with other women, with other non-binary individuals, if that is who R-worded them? How does that change the way that they talk about and feel about themselves? How does that change their relationship with sex? After my essay, I spiraled into hypersexuality. I tried to gain my power back. I wanted to wash away that sexual experience and replace it as fast as possible with a different experience. I wanted to forget about it as soon as possible, and in an attempt to expedite my healing process, I just opened myself up to more abuse. I ended up sleeping with people who didn't deserve me, and it just made me end up feeling like shit. I tolerated a lot of bad behavior because I was trying to overwrite that very traumatic experience instead of healing the right way and processing it. Hypersexuality and self-sabotage are very common in SA survivors. Again, no 2 survivor stories are the same, but those 2 behaviors are very common. And my experience was not particularly unique. I was in the deepest depression of my life at this point. I isolated myself from my friends because they would continue hanging out with my abuser. My self-worth was at an all-time low because I gave myself to people who made me feel like shit. The only things I did was classes, because I was in college, eat, sleep, and dance because I was in a ballet group, and thank God, because that was the only fucking healthy socialization I had at that time. And even when I was there, socializing, being a person, I put on a brave face because I didn't want to be anyone else's burden. I smiled and pretended that everything was fine. Eventually, after probably over a year of just abusing myself, I put my foot down. I was like, I can't fucking take this anymore. I can't let people keep treating me like shit. If I keep going down this road, I'm going to myself. And from then on, I was very selective about who I let into my life, not just relationship-wise, but my friends too. And I realized who my real friends were. And when I finally did start seeing someone that deserved me, I didn't know how to handle it. I forced myself to detach emotionally for as long as I could because I just assumed that they would hurt me like everyone else did. When that wasn't the case, I could finally feel myself start to relax in that relationship. I felt more comfortable setting basic boundaries and voicing when I wasn't feeling like having sex. I almost couldn't believe that someone would actually consider my feelings and my comforts without guilting me into accommodating theirs. I didn't tell anyone for about a year. And when I finally did tell people, I was met with mixed reactions. Some people felt sorry for me and comforted me. Some people fell into an uncomfortable silence. Some people asked for more details and said that they would continue to be friends with the man who assaulted me. If you're writing essay, especially in a modern setting, this needs to be included. I can't describe the heartbreak of thinking that someone is your friend and then siding with your abuser. I knew women who claimed to be activists in the public and were all about women's rights, but then in private, when I was quietly suffering, they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, why didn't you say anything?" And then would end up hanging out with him the next day, like what I said never happened. I will never forget you bitches. You can fucking choke. Not to mention the nightmares. Oh my God. I had regular nightmares of that experience for years. It's been almost 10 years at this point, and I still occasionally have nightmares about that experience. And they are very infrequent at this point, but in the first 5 years, I would have a nightmare about that probably like a few times a month at least, sometimes more. But like, do you see how much I covered? That is the baseline. And it is, of course, one very specific experience. There are plenty of people that have had much more severe experiences than I. People that were like afraid to leave their own house because of how traumatized they were. Like I said, if you're writing essay and you haven't experienced it yourself, you have to read about other people's experiences with essay and the lasting effects it has. Just go on Reddit. People spill their deepest, darkest secrets there. People have shared their experiences on social media. There's so many resources from verified publications, psychologists that work directly with people who have been essayed. It has happened to so many of us. There's literally no excuse for it to be portrayed badly on screen. I'm going to try to have as much nuance as possible in this conversation, but I also want to be honest. If I'm told that a show or movie has an R word or essay, 99% of the time, I'm not going to watch it. I've talked about this on TikTok a lot, and a lot of people agree. Most of them are women, but a lot of people agree. I'm of the firm belief that there are only a handful, handful that actually require essay to be written into it. The vast majority of stories simply do not need essay. You just don't need it in any capacity. But I also don't think that art should ever be censored. We should be talking about and showing dark aspects of humanity in stories. But the fact that sexual assault, and most often sexual assault against women, is the default, that is a huge problem, and it needs to be addressed in the writer's room because we see it all the fucking time. Violence against women should not be a casual plot point. And if you're going to include it, understand the gravity of what you're doing and make it a bigger part of your story. Don't do it unless you're ready to devote an entire arc to that and allow for subtle echoes of it throughout the rest of the show. Because with SA, that is the reality. As always, I have Rwan's GoFundMe linked below. She was supposed to attend university this year, but the Israeli occupation bombed her home and her school out of existence. If you're not able to donate, that's okay. I know times are hard. Make sure to leave a comment to boost the algorithm, because there's got to be someone on this dang internet that can donate $1 or $2. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves. Bye.